So the Elven reunion was really just a big pile of nothing, and the community so far is just not really reacting well to this entire thing, which is absolutely fair. I mean, the Elven reunification was marketed as like this big feature of Midnight with foreshadowing of the Naga, Azshara, Scourge, elves. I mean, Lady Vashj and the Naga are literally one of the reasons the Blood Elves even managed to survive. However, in just one single month since Midnight release, the entire sunwell storyline ended. The corruption and the cleansing, the different variations of high elves just united in like a 20-minute questline, but really, most importantly, nothing changed. No new playable races, no changes to factions, no really new interesting characters. So what is going on with the Elven reunion, and why does it appear so underwhelming? With Midnight now released, there is so much to catch up to, and you can do that faster than ever with WoW coaching and overgear. It's not just about playing the game more. You can put in a ton of time and never get better. Sometimes you need a more experienced outside perspective. This is where overgear steps in. It connects you with the best players, and they will pinpoint your exact problems that you're making, saving you so much time. It's amazing for both PvP and PvE, and you can become a much better player with minimal time investment with their coaching. Best of all, you can book a session immediately. You can also use my code 10Dorons to get an awesome discount, and you can start your own personal coaching session today with my link in the description below. So personally, as someone that was speculating about this pretty much since the World Soul Saga announcement back in 2023, I can say I 100% agree with the community sentiment, and that is that the entire Elven reunification was not only rushed, but also extremely underwhelming. I mean, literally nothing happened, and the entire thing ended up in like a 20-minute questline, which honestly I felt like they shouldn't have even announced this as a feature, especially the big feature they promoted it as. So as you may know, elves are the most popular race by all the statistics by far. Like half the player base are elves, which is why they very likely push the Elven expansion and also the entire Elven reunion. But pretty much all the current elves originate from the Night Elves from Kalimdor. So sure, if you want to take it to ancient history, then it is the trolls, but most of the current variants that we have are just offshoots of the Night Elves and the Highborn, who are also Night Elves. The Highborn were exiled and settled in the Eastern Kingdoms on the Amani land, and until like a couple of decades ago, for thousands of years, they were just High Elves and nothing more. Then Arthas attack destroyed like 90% of the Highland population, and most of the remaining elves turned into Blood Elves in honor of their fallen brethren. However, those that weren't victims, like the Elven diaspora, remained as the High Elves. Then the Blood Elf phase ended up being actually super short. The whole Fel magic dependence was barely a few year thing, and since then, by all the accounts, the Blood Elves are once again High Elves. There's really not that much of a difference. However, a decade back, we had the entire Void Elf creation, which was incredibly minor when it comes to like the total population. There's not many Void Elves, and these Void Elves were exiled because they feared what happened, what pretty much just happened with the Sunwell. But all these variants are pretty much the same thing. I mean, High Elves, Blood Elves are just a name thing, especially now with the recent customization changes. So it's not even the eye difference or Fel magic dependence, and this is exactly why the Elven reunion was such a disappointment. I think Blizzard forgot that the elves can actually split a lot further than Quality Lost and had some really big developments over like thousands of years. For example, we have the Sunline, the Fallen Blood Elves that were turned into the Undead by Arthas, and most importantly, the elephant in the room, and that is Azshara and her Naga, which I personally expected would be a big part of this Elven Union thing. The reason I expected it is not because of playable Naga, but because everything it hinted at. If you remember back in Dragonflight, we got the return of Azshara foreshadowed in the World Soul Saga, and then we had the appearance of the Naga on the shores of Quality Lost now in Midnight. Furthermore, it's just a symbolic thing. I mean, Azshara is literally the reason the elves get split so far. Her appearance would make perfect sense in this ultimate union. I'm not saying she would unify the elves, but her appearance could trigger the unification. See, back in the day, when Night Elves truly split away from the trolls and became elves, they ruled a thing that was called the Night Elven Empire that spanned over most of Azeroth. At the time, they were the most dominant and unified race on the planet. They were ruled by Queen Azshara, that was incredibly proficient in magic, just got the Blood Elves out today, and it was really her greed and lust for power that split the Night Elves into all the races we now have. She was in a way responsible for the sundering of Azeroth, the creation of the continents we have today, and the elves splitting across these continents. Her actions led her followers, the Highborn, to ultimately be exiled and to move to the Eastern Kingdoms. Her actions created the entire Naga race and tied them into the Old Gods and the Void, which we're finally solving at this point in time in history after all those years. So if we have a union on one side, on the opposite end is Azshara that split them and created all these variations. So the 4 years of foreshadowing for Azshara's return, the Naga, the Void influence and everything, her role, really it would have made the most amount of sense. I mean, she's the ancient queen and the ruler of all the elves. Now, here is the biggest problem and what most of the community dislikes. It's the fact that Midnight was released exactly a month and a half ago from this video. It literally ended the Elven reunion already. I mean, by the time I'm talking about this, it's already old news, so this ended in like less than 1 month, like the first month of the expansion, which is absolutely crazy. Do you guys remember that they announced this back on BlizzCon with the World Soul Saga? It was announced as a big feature together with Return of the Titans, the entire reveal of this giant conspiracy over Azeroth. I mean, literally 1 month in, we dealt with Xelatat in Quotalas. The sunwell turned into the Darkhold, and it was cleansed into the Dawnwell, and the elves reunited, and by elves I mean just a couple of elves. Saying this was rushed is beyond an understatement, as literally nothing even happened. When they announced this, I was thinking this was going to be a huge, like a game-changing thing, like what a reunification means when you define the word. I was expecting a possible new race like the Naga becoming neutral, or elves in general becoming neutral, because they have always kind of been between factions. They're pretty much the only race that is between the Alliance and the Horde. I mean, High Elves were historically the core Alliance race, together with the humans and the dwarves, and then after the Scourge thing they had to join the Horde to survive, but it was mainly just the way things were at that point in history. Then when the Void Elves split, the High Elves once again became an Alliance race, and also High Elves were an Alliance thing the entire time, they just weren't playable, and since then, I mean, everything has been ambiguous. Then the entire Silvermoon thing being neutral, so naturally they were kind of pointing towards the fact that the elves might be able to pick a faction and just kind of be elves. What I'm trying to say is that the way this was advertised was like this was going to be a huge thing, like a game-changing thing, potentially involving the undead, the sunlight. What actually ended up happening was pretty much, to be completely honest and fair, just a big pile of nothing. I mean, you had about 20 minutes of questline and dialogue. The Nightborn and the Night Elves played a minor role, but the Blood Elves and the Void Elves and the High Elves and everyone with all the bad blood kind of just fixed things up immediately in a few dialogues and just went into the entire direction, let's just be friends. I mean, story-wise, this makes sense. I mean, they only split a decade ago and the split never even made sense to begin with, but what I'm saying is the Elven reunion should have never been advertised as a thing to like lead the expansion. It makes sense that it happened, but we're talking about thousands of years of history just kind of being rushed in a questline and not really resolving or changing anything to begin with. Azshara's return does seem like it will happen, like regardless of this entire unification thing, but unfortunately I don't think much will be happening with the Naga, which honestly just seems like a huge missed opportunity. I mean, it could have been tied in really well, as you remember when Quotalas was near destruction back in Warcraft 3. It was the Naga and Lady Vashj that came to the aid of Keltas in their most desperate times. Sure, they later turned into villains, but without the Naga, the Blood Elves might have never survived and would never be able to recover into what they are now. These Naga are also Highborn and share the exact same heritage. They were also victims of the Void Realm, which we're dealing with right now. It would have made perfect sense to get a good faction of the Naga, Queen Azshara and everyone else, and then some sort of a reunion where all the elves of the same heritage unite in a way, like this big questline. I mean, they did say like it's not the end, like it will happen across multiple expansions, but who even knows what they really mean right now. This could have at this point in time included a new potential playable race or some sort of a change to factions or customizations or Quotalas in general, especially as this was marketed as one of the major features of the World Soul Saga. However, as I stated many times this year, ultimately nothing really happened. It feels like Quotalas stuff was planned and they just kind of shoehorned the unification in just to have some sort of a feature to announce. Thanks for watching. Check out how Anduin seems to be abdicating and who will lead the alliance by clicking on the screen, and subscribe to my brand new Witcher lore channel by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.